That's right. Thanks, Kaylee. We have our next guest. We're going to go with Joanna Marsh, who's going to talk to us about what's going on right now with the rail industry. Joanna, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey Tony, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. Thanks. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you as well. And I'm excited to get into this topic because we're talking about what the latest is going on within the rail industry, what's going on over there with some of the regulations that might be happening, and what kind of influence that might have coming from what's happening with the current administration.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on in the rail industry right now. Obviously, on one hand, you have the Surface Transportation Board trying to push the freight railroads to improve their service, and of course, the freight railroads want to improve their service as well. So you have that piece going on, and then you have the labor agreement negotiations. No, excuse me, negotiations going on as well that have kind of. Just kind of come to a standstill. And so now that's kind of in a cooling off period, and a committee appointed by President Joe Biden might kind of help out with trying to figure out how to get the unions and the railroads kind of into agreement here. Or Congress might intervene too. As you have that piece, and then of course you have last week the subcommittee on railroads, pipelines, and hazardous materials with the U.S. House Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure. It's a long title. They held a hearing on rail safety, and so they invited FRA, Federal Railroad Administration Administrator Amit Bose, and some other union and railroad representatives to talk about rail safety. And yeah, so there's just a lot going on with the freight rail. Yeah.
There's a ton of hands in the fire when we're talking about safety, all the way up from transport of liquefied natural gas to looking at environmental studies to talking about implementation, can't talk either today, of new technology. And when it comes to this, a lot of kind of the overarching goals of what these agencies aim to do can kind of get muddled, right? Can get lost in the translation of like, there are so many people talking about this. At the end of the day, Joanna, who is making the overarching decisions for what finally ends up happening with the railroads? Is it the folks at the FRA? Is it the folks at the STB? Who is that final say in what can or can't go on with the railways?
Sure. That's a good question. I mean, it's like I said, because you have all these different things going on, there are also different agencies involved oversee different aspects of freight rail. So you have the Surface Transportation Board kind of overlooking service issues, and then you have the Federal Railroad Administration overseeing sort of rail operations from a safety perspective. So how does technology or the latest in safety technology, how do you integrate those technologies into rail operations, that kind of thing. And also passenger rail, they also handle passenger rail as well. So you have those two bodies. The Surface Transportation Board is independent of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and of course, the Federal Railroad Administration is part of the DOT. So you have that, and then on top of that, you have the course of not so much the STB, but with the FRA. The course of how the FRA might look at issues depends also on who's the president at the time, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, and so you can kind of see those politics trickle down too from the White House.
That's definitely interesting to see how that could impact what goes on in the industry and this segment. Joanna, when you think about this industry, you just mentioned there's a lot of different entities that oversee different areas. Are there any overlapping areas where you see that there are just agreements in one area or one initiative? Of course, unions can kind of be a little bit of a decisive one depending on which party is in charge at the moment. But when it comes to things like safety or how to implement those technologies, is there any agreements or anything that people can kind of settle on when we're looking at this right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really hard to say right now because I think part of the issue is that just in the last several years, the various stakeholders have gotten more contentious over things, and I think part of it has to do with the implementation of precision scheduled railroading by the Class 1 railroads. Practically all of the Class 1s have adopted it. BNSF hasn't really said publicly that they have, but some people seem to think that they have. And so with that PSR, they call it kind of streamlining operations, but it's also a way of cutting costs. And some have been concerned that that perhaps the railroads might have cut too deep in terms of having enough crews and having enough power in terms of locomotives. And so that kind of is in the background of all this discussion over, between service and also between safety technology as well. Because with safety technology, you have some concern by the unions that, this is great technology, but what if the railroad decides to reduce visual inspections for this technology and put me in charge of a wider swath of territory, because that's kind of what you do under PSR. And so I guess a lot of union members are concerned about being stretched too thin. But of course, that debate about PSR keeps raging on, even though it's been about 5 years or so since it's five. I'm not sure, but quite a while since it's been implemented. So,
and that was going to be my final question for you, Joanna, is that it seems like these debates, they just kind of drag on and on and on. Is there any timeline now that Biden has appointed this committee to kind of take a look at it? Is there any timeline on decision-making processes, or is it something that can just be kind of drug out as long as possible?
Sure. It's hard to say. I mean, I think part of it will depend on the midterm elections and how whether Democrats will still be in charge, or if Republicans will be able to gain some seats. And so that kind of in a way, if the Republicans kind of take control of Congress, that could kind of push things. Kind of prolong things even further, and of course the unions now are kind of trying to push the negotiations, or the labor contract, not negotiations, but just kind of trying to move the procedure along while Biden is still in office, because of course if he loses that election and a Republican is elected as president, then that could affect the timeline for things. But yeah, there's just a lot going on, and I'm not sure when it will come to a resolution, but hopefully something will come to, something will happen soon. So we'll see.
Hopefully we get the trains moving soon, to put it in a terrible pun. Joanna, thank you for joining us today. Great to have you as always, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
I don't like that pun.
I'm gonna like that?
I like that pun.
I thought it was bad. It's okay.
No.
It's okay.
I like it. Keep it coming.
They can't always be good ones. All right, we're gonna head over to Christian Thomas right now. He's got our first look at the social roundabout for the day.